Sonic, the heart of your system.
Hi guys, it's Silas from Kit Guru, and today I'll be taking a look at a new addition to the popular system builder Cyberpower PC's Hyperliquid 2 series, the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX. Now for starters, I'm sure some of you will get an idea of this system specification just from the name alone. At £3,900 including VAT, it does feature a Threadripper CPU, and the RTX is a dead giveaway as to what kind of GPU you can expect. In this instance, the all guns blazing 2080 Ti. More on the specs in a minute. The system arrived on a pallet, which makes perfect sense considering initially its phenomenal weight, coming in at almost 30 kilos, and secondly, its fragility. As a top tier system within the Hyperliquid 2 series, it is a standard custom liquid cooled and features hardline acrylic tubing, which looks phenomenal, much cleaner than flexible tubing, but the lack of flexibility does mean that there is a higher chance for something to be shaken loose in transit rather than just wobbling around. Being affixed to the pallet, though, does mean it's unlikely a courier will be throwing the system around, so this is definitely a smart move by Cyberpower. Once I had the system off the pallet, a quick inspection showed no damage to the case box, and with the system out, it's evident a lot of care has gone into ensuring everything arrives as it should. The inside of the case was also heavily packed with air bubbles, again ensuring that nothing moves in shipping. With all the packaging removed, you get a much better view of the internals, which do look absolutely amazing. Kudos to the builder in charge. The tubing is perfectly run and super clean, and it's clear that rather than multiple odd looking bends to reach cooling parts, a number of extensions have been used to achieve the clean aesthetic. Really good stuff. Cabling also looks great. A quick check around the back of the system shows everything has been managed really well, with cable ties holding everything down neatly. It is worth noting that alongside the system itself, you do receive a motherboard box with all of the accessories that would have come with all of the included components, so any future upgrades are going to be made relatively easy considering all the accessories come with the system. I couldn't locate any info on the builder in charge. This is something I have come across with some other system builders, but whoever it was, give that man a cookie. Once I had retained my composure, I turned my attention away from the custom liquid cooling and onto the rest of the build. Running through these specs shows that basically everything is as top tier as you would expect. For starters, the system comprises of an AMD Threadripper 2950X mounted in the MSI X399 Gaming Pro Carbon AC motherboard. This is accompanied by 32 gigs of Corsair Vengeance LPX black memory at a 3200 MHz speed in a 4x8GB stick configuration, and storage is a mixture of M.2 and a traditional hard drive. You get a 500GB Samsung 970 EVO NVMe SSD and a Seagate 4TB Barracuda drive for bulk storage. The PSU as standard is a Corsair 1200W AX series unit, which strikes me as being a little bit overkill, and the case chosen the pretty stunning Cooler Master Cosmos C700P. You do of course also get a copy of Windows 10 Home. The Cosmos C700P, bit of an interesting choice here. I do think you could have fit basically the exact same specification into a smaller case, but this does allow a lot more flexibility in terms of upgrading, say, the custom liquid cooling or adding components, extra storage down the line if required. The case itself is really well decked out with I/O as well. You do have a number of USB 3.0 ports on the front of the case for connecting USB pens and things. The case does also feature a tempered glass side panel window, but it is a little bit tinted, a little bit mirrored, so I've removed it to give you a better idea of the internals of this system, a better overview of what's inside. As mentioned, the GPU installed is the new MSI Gaming X Trio RTX 2080 Ti, which will be a little bit faster out the box with a 1755 MHz boost clock. It's also a 3-fan model, so it'll be interesting to see how it fares in our thermal testing. Price-wise, the £3,900 mark actually seems to be pretty reasonable. A quick check on purchasing each individual component standalone worked out to be roughly around the £3,500 price mark, so basically a 10% markup. Now, considering the amount of work that has gone into the custom loop, cable management, and the fact that you also receive technical support and a Cyberpower warranty, rather than having to deal with the manufacturer directly, this strikes me as actually being pretty fair. In terms of warranty, the standard 3-year refers mainly to the labour, but you do also get 2 years of parts cover and 6 months of transportation charges that are also covered. You can of course upgrade this though, and considering the personal cost of shipping the system would likely be quite high for an extra £19 or so, you can increase transport to a full year. Shipping would probably be more than about £20, so this is realistically a pretty safe bet and worth adding on. So from the spec, its obvious performance is going to be pretty strong, but it is a bit of a strange configuration to me. Clearly the 2080 Ti is going to be the card of choice for those looking for a high-performance single card gaming configuration, but the 2950X isn't necessarily the best option for gaming. In most instances, the 8700K or 9700K will offer a better value proposition for gaming specifically, but the 2950X's much higher core count at 16 cores, 32 threads, has the system leaning a little bit more towards workstation applications. This being said, a high-end system for those looking to live stream, record gameplay, or edit alongside gaming, this makes a little bit more sense, but it will be interesting to see where the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX falls in our testing. There are a number of extras bolted onto the system. Lighting has been enhanced with a couple of LED strips. However, it's worth noting that this can only be controlled with the included remote. So you do need to flick between the Mystic lighting software and remote to set up your lighting. Not really a deal breaker though. Both the GPU and motherboard being MSI means they both support the Mystic lighting software, which is cool as it saves on the number of lighting software packages you would need to install and configure independently. The Cosmos C700P also features its own lighting, which is controlled through the case by the I/O. So there are a few different changes that need to be made to get everything to match up. The coolant colour is purple violet, which is, I think, a great choice as default. It perfectly matches the case choice and the Cooler Master colourway. The liquid cooling setup as well is basically all EKWB and is the Cyberpower Hybrid Liquid 2 Rigid Large Kit, which covers just the CPU and a 360mm radiator. This though should easily be enough to keep the 2950X's temperatures at bay. There are of course options for further upgrading the system. For starters, the GPU can also be included in the loop, and a block is around about £240 for the non-RGB version. The included 360mm rad would likely be enough for both the GPU and CPU, but the Cosmos C700P being so vast means that you could very easily fit another 360mm radiator at the top of the case if you so chose to. Adding on braided cables is also an option, a full kit only costing £34, which would cover the 24-pin, 8-pin EPS and your GPU power connectors. Wi-Fi is also included thanks to the MSI X399 Gaming Pro Carbon AC motherboard, but if you were to swap boards you would likely have to add a Wi-Fi card to the build. The default configuration for the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX basically covers everything though, with the exception of an optical drive. So although there is a ton of options for configuration, you're still safe in the knowledge that there wouldn't be any glaring issues like an inability to connect to your Wi-Fi network out of the box. Now, I had mentioned that the PSU being a 1200 watt unit did seem a little bit excessive, but this does certainly allow some flexibility for upgrades, more specifically say adding a second 2080 Ti down the road. This paired with the motherboard's SLI support means that you're basically set for this sort of upgrade, and I could definitely see this being the sort of thing that I would do maybe a couple of years on. A little excessive now maybe, but good to know that you're covered with a little additional future-proofing. So the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX is completely kitted out. Part selection is solid, although it does strike me as a system more so aimed towards flexibility rather than solely for gaming, and will suit a bit more of a varied use and workload. The build is great and really clean, and the liquid cooling looks frankly awesome. As does all the lighting. It certainly looks like a £4,000 system, but it will be interesting to see if it performs like one. So let's take a look at some of our testing. So let's start with temperatures. Testing for temps consists of running both instances of the Unigen Heaven benchmark to stress the GPU, whilst also stress testing with AIDA64 to get the CPU nice and toasty. Results look really good. At idle, both CPU and GPU temps are pretty reasonable, with the CPU looking a little better thanks to the water cooling loop. At full load we do see these temps start to climb, more so for the 2080 Ti as it's only air cooled. Putting all 32 threads to work does show a rise in CPU temperatures to almost about 70 degrees, but in general use the CPU temps did stick a little bit closer to the idle temps between about 35 and 45 degrees. The 2080 Ti did rise close to 80 degrees when stressed, which isn't crazy, but you'd likely see much better load temps by including it in, say, the water cooling loop. Chucking a block on wouldn't hurt in this instance. It's worth noting that the 360 rad being mounted to the front of the case, intaking air is potentially contributing to these temps, as well as the 2080 Ti, it's only receiving warm air basically. It would have been really interesting to test with, say, the 360 rad mounted at the top of the case, as there is some space there, and fill the front with fresh air intake fans, but I figured probably not the best idea to start taking the loop apart. The Cosmos C700P is one of the most flexible cases on the market today, offering a number of different motherboard orientations and fan/radiator mounts, so there would be a lot of scope to configure this to your preference. While stressing both the CPU and GPU, we can also take a look at power consumption, which came in close to about 500 watts, which is still nice and efficient at about 40% load. This does show that a lot of the 1200 watts available are not really being fully utilised, so even a 750 or 850 watt unit would have easily been enough. This being said, as mentioned, the flexibility that the 1200 watt Corsair unit offers does mean that you could chuck in a second graphics card without coming close to the limit, likely bumping power consumption up to the 850 watt mark. Taking a look at noise levels though is actually really impressive. With the system at idle, I achieved a lowest reading of 41.3 dBA, which was barely audible with my head next to the case. This barely changed at full load, only increasing by a few dBA, super impressive really, and just as with the idle, also barely audible. If gaming with a headset, it's very unlikely you'll be able to pick up on this, and it's great to see such a small change even when properly stressing the system. The Cosmos C700P is in part to thank for this. It's not a sound dampened case, but the solid build quality and really thick tempered glass side panel do a really good job of keeping the system quiet. Taking a look at the storage, the Crystal Disk Mark scores are basically what you would expect. The Samsung 970 EVO is a really good choice for this system and makes total sense. It's still easily fast enough for shifting data around, and although you could upgrade to the Pro version, say, it's hard to say how noticeable the speed increase would be on a day-to-day basis. In testing, boot speeds made the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX a pleasure to work with, which is kind of to be expected really. Instances of restarting the system taking only a matter of seconds. The Samsung 970 EVO speeds also highlight how fast storage has come when looking at the hard drive speeds. The 4TB Seagate Barracuda is fine, but it's clear this should be used for general file storage and backups. A game library would also be fine, as you would really only be sacrificing some loading times. The size, however, of the M.2 also helps to make up for the slower hard drive speeds. 500GB would allow a few current games to be installed with space left over for, say, video editing projects, basically offering a bunch of space for things that will actually benefit from the 970 EVO's faster speeds. The benefits of the AMD Threadripper 2950X's high core count and thread count, 16 and 32 respectively, suggest it's going to be an absolute beast in multi-core performance tests. So of course we had a few Cinebench passes just to check that out. The 2950X absolutely killed it, and the multi-core pass flew by in basically a matter of seconds, which is great to see. The 2950X is running at stock though, so it's only really ramping up to 4.4 GHz when you're really pushing it. You probably could squeeze some extra speed out of it by overclocking, sacrificing some extra temps, which the custom loop would handle realistically with no problem. However, personally, I think it's plenty fast enough. With the Cinebench runs whipping by so fast, it made sense, as Leo recommended, to test with a bit more of a likely worst case scenario. So I also had a quick test on Blender and the BMW render demo file. I focused on the CPU blend rather than GPU, and the results were just as impressive. The 2950X chewed through this test in about under 3 minutes or so. From the outset, the 2950X was always going to be impressive in this area. It's perfectly suited to tasks like rendering. Taking a look at temps when rendering the BMW demo file, utilising all these cores, just as with our Ada64 test, did show similar results. CPU temps would climb quickly to about 64 degrees and would sit there for the full 3 minutes, but this is kind of to be expected with all the cores being utilised. In 3D Mark, results for CPU and GPU are also just as impressive. A bit of a joy watching the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX blast through Firestrike and TimeSpy without any issues of stuttering or FPS drops. So CPU performance is super thanks to the 2950X, but as the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX features the MSI Gaming X Trio RTX 2080 Ti, you would also expect gaming performance to be exemplary. And you wouldn't be wrong. I chose a few games to test with. We had Rise of the Tomb Raider, The Division, For Honor, and Ghost Recon Wildlands. Across the board, performance was great, easily handling 4K gaming with just the one card installed. Both high and ultra settings in 1080 and 1440 provided high enough FPS to easily justify a high refresh rate monitor, and with my 4K testing, the only game to drop minorly was Ghost Recon Wildland when completely maxed out. In this instance, averaging 64 FPS, it was still very playable, with only a couple of dips down closer to 50 frames per second. Watching the run through in the benchmark, these small dips weren't hugely noticeable to me though. This being said, there is some scope to drop to high settings or simply make some small adjustments. And at high, say for instance, a 72 FPS average was achieved, which provides a bit of a safety net. In more competitive games like For Honor, again, even when maxed out at 4K, the 2080 Ti handled the benchmark easily, with an 86 FPS average. Full details on all of our testing can be found at kitguru.net, so make sure to head on over if you would like to inspect the results in a little bit more detail. Overall, I was left really impressed with the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX system. Testing results came back basically just as expected. The Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX really does dominate in both CPU and GPU intensive tasks, which makes total sense. Considering the 2080 Ti is top tier, it had no problems in instances of gaming, and for those looking for a good 4K gaming experience with all the settings cranked, it's clearly the go-to choice. Equally, if you're looking to game at a lower resolution, higher refresh rate, you would definitely be making full use of a 144Hz option, tweaking settings to get the best results. As I mentioned, thermals for the 2080 Ti are good, but adding a block and including it in the existing loop would definitely be worth consideration, which would also allow some overclocking, boosting performance even further. Testing has also shown this isn't essential, though, as it had no trouble in our gaming tests. The AMD Threadripper 2950X in CPU tests also absolutely smashed it, even at stock speeds. Really hard to deny, it's a great option for video and 3D editing and rendering, and in these instances the 32GB of RAM also starts to make a bit more sense. Great to see that this is an option which has been included as default in the specification. The 16 cores, 32 threads aren't really being fully utilised in instances of gaming though, so again, it's not really the best option solely for gaming, but for a mix of work and play, as it were, to me this is where the components choice makes a bit more sense. Equally for streaming, the 2950X is still well suited, so the Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX is a bit of a Swiss Army knife really. It covers all these bases really well, but this should really be the case for £3,900. The price is steep, but it's clear from the quality of the build, a lot of time has gone into the system's aesthetics, decked out with the custom loop, clean cable management, and loads of configurable lighting. I think it looks great. It's hard though for me to say this is a must-have configuration, as it's not going to appeal to everybody. But for those looking for a high-powered kind of jack-of-all-trades, it's definitely a system to consider. So thank you for checking out this review of Cyberpower's new Hyperliquid Threadripper RTX system. Please make sure to leave a like or dislike, and let us know in the comments what you think of this beast. Please also consider subscribing, and if you would like notifications of video releases from KitGuru, make sure to click the bell icon below as well. I've been Silas from KitGuru, and I will see you in the next one.